General of the Jerusalem Press Club, and I welcome you to this briefing. Please be kind and turn off your cell phones or switch them to silent mode. Nothing will come through your cell phone will be as interesting, I guess, what we're going to hear in a second.
You're much too kind.
And welcome to our YouTube followers. We are very pleased to host this morning Professor Avi Weiss. You all received his bio, so with your permission, I'll just give the highlights.
You can skip it altogether from my perspective.
No, I insist. So Professor Weiss has a PhD from the University of Chicago. He's a member of the Faculty of Economics at Bar-Ilan University. Also headed was the head of the chair of the department. He's the editor of the Economic Quarterly, the Journal of the Israeli Economic Association, and was not only limiting himself to ivory tower, but also was member of many important economic and social commissions. And today he's the CEO of the Taub Center. And as always, we are very pleased to host you with State of the Nation Report 2006. So please,
Okay, well, thank you very much. And of course, I invite questions. You're welcome to ask as much as you want. I thought I would get more of a repeat audience. I guess I bombed out last year, but most of you are new. So what I'm going to be doing is stepping you through our latest report that comes out. Now, the center, for those of you who don't know us well, the center has existed for 36 years now. It was formed in 1982 when then Prime Minister Menachem Begin, who you can see in the pictures here on the side, was turned to the American JPC. And asked them to start a Brookings type of institute, an institute that would do research in socioeconomic issues and would not be dependent at all on the Israeli government, and that would be apolitical, and that would only deal in things dealing with economics and with the societal level, and be able to give out reports that the government could depend upon without thinking that they are dependent on what the government is asking for or is looking for. So a place that you could trust to research. We've been an institute or a center that for 36 years has been able to maintain neutrality, is seen as a neutral broker by all players, and as a result, all doors are open before us. We sit with members of all the different parties in the Knesset, with all the ministries. They all come and consult with us, the World Bank, the IMF, the Bank of Israel, of course, the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Everybody basically comes to us in order to be able to hear the findings that we have. We put out academic level reports. The research that we do there is the same type of research we do at the universities. It's very, very high level, very advanced statistical methods, econometrics, in order to make sure that the results we have are real. And we have an agenda. And our agenda is that everybody has the real data, that decision makers in the country are working from actual information and not working from just submission from what they think is true. So that's what our agenda is. And we're very successful in it. What we want is that everybody's working from the same page. The politician's job is then to decide what to do about it, to argue about what to do about it, to disagree about what to do about it, but let them all be working from the same information and not just making up things according to what they think. And we're very successful in that. We have legislation that cites our names, that cites our research, and talks about what we've done. We're in committees all the time inside the Knesset, and as I said, all the ministries come and consult with us. We are not government funded. We will not take any kind of government funding in order to maintain our neutrality, because I don't know if anybody who's been in the country for a little while may know that Israelis can sometimes be a little bit cynical, a little bit. And therefore, if you take money from the government, they might take a look at you and say, well, they took money, and therefore that's why they're saying what they're saying. We're not willing for that to happen. It's all private donations, and that's who we are, and that's who we've been for quite a long time. So what I'm going to do today, which is not my usual type of lecture, is step you through our latest book. What we have is we put out research on a regular basis throughout the year. But we also, at the end of the year, put out a large book, a 300, 400, 500-page book, which has all new pieces of research in them, and puts them out for the first time. And that comes out in December every year. And what I'm going to do is step you through that. The other big publication we have is what's available in back here. Some of you have taken it already, which is a little thin book on which each page tells a single story. And together, tries to tell a fairly continuous story of what's going on in the Israeli economy. That comes from our research and also from other issues we thought were important in order to tie things together. But today we're going to be stepping you through our latest book, the newest things that we have. So I'm not going to do a lot of background because I figured that you guys have that background already, and therefore I didn't start at that point. What I will say is that what was different about this year's book than most years is that we had sort of a central theme. And the central theme to some extent was taking a look at the Israeli Arab communities. And the reason we chose that as the theme is because of Government Resolution 922. Now, for those of you who don't know what Government Resolution 922 is, it was an allocation by the Israeli government that started this year, in which they allocated 15 billion shekel for the Arab-Israeli communities. That's a lot of money. And there's a lot to be done with it. It's a comprehensive plan. It looks at all the different issues that are arising inside of the Arab-Israeli community and tries to address them. There are a lot of concerns about implementation. There are a lot of concerns about, will some of the weaker municipalities know what to do with the money? Will they be able to use it wisely? Will they not? And those are issues that are being addressed. But still, we think it's important that if we want to later on measure how successful was the government in affecting things, you better know where you started at. And if you know what the starting point is, then you can better understand what it is that you've actually managed to do. So that's what we've done in this year's book, although we addressed a lot of other issues, and I'm going to start with a little bit about macroeconomics. So the macroeconomic story in Israel has a lot of very, very positives and a lot of negatives with respect to what's been happening lately. Employment is basically at an all-time high. Unemployment, as you can see, those are those bars. Unemployment rates are historically low inside of Israel. And more people are going to the workforce. You have weaker populations who are going more also. The ultra-Orthodox males, who we know don't participate very much, are participating in the workforce at higher rates. The Arab Israeli women, who we know don't participate very much, are participating at higher rates. Everybody's working at very, very high rates. There's higher levels of education. So those are very, very positive stories with respect to what's happening. We do have to understand that those two populations I mentioned particularly still tend to have low levels of human capital, and therefore they're entering the workforce at low levels of wages. Their productivity, what they're contributing, is not as high as what was being contributed by people before them. So those are things we need to understand going into the situation now. We're not yet perhaps at what we would call full employment. You could still have an increase in the ultra-Orthodox men going into the workforce. You could have an increase, and we expect an increase, in the Arab women going into the workforce. But the people who will be entering will be in lower numbers, and the productivity that they add is not going to be as high. So that's part of the issue. If you take a look at what's been happening to real wages, so if you take a look at the light blue line over here, not the dark one, the light blue line shows you what's been happening from the consumer's perspective to their income. And from the consumer's perspective, what we see is that prices have been going down and wages have been going up. And that light blue line you see that's been going up over the past few years, anything greater than zero means that there's growth. Anything below zero means that it's contracting. There has been growth in real wages over the past 3 years. That's a significant change that's happened, and it's very, very good to know. The thing is that solid blue line there is showing that actually should have happened earlier. And it didn't happen for technical purposes. It has to do with how prices are measured. But in reality, over the past few years, there's been an improvement inside of the Israeli society with respect to wages per hour. Take a look at prices, consumption prices inside of Israel. They are now on their way down. They're not on their way up. The OECD prices, the OECD of the developed countries, their prices are still going up. The prices inside of Israel are actually on their way down a little bit, but they're certainly not rising like they were previously in the OECD. That doesn't mean it's cheap here. It just means it's not quite as relatively expensive as before, and we'll get into that a little bit later also. The other side of that coin is that consumption has actually been going up. So if prices are going down, Israelis are actually consuming more, and it's been rising faster than the OECD. So a lot of this is very, very good news. If we put that all together and we take a look at the standard of living in Israel, well, the standard of living in Israel, very interestingly, went up very, very sharply during the 1990s, and that was when you had the large immigration, the large aliyah from the former Soviet Union. That had a huge effect on the Israeli economy. And the standard of living during that period rose very, very drastically. During the first decade of this millennia, actually the standard of living was going down. But since about 2010, 2009, the standard of living in Israel relative to the OECD has been going back up. So there's been a marked improvement in what's in the standard of living for Israelis inside of Israel. Now, if you take a look, though, on what's happening looking forward, the growth rate in Israel is actually fairly low. It's 1.1%. This is the annual growth rate of income per capita, per person. One thing you have to remember, that doesn't mean that Israel is not doing well in terms of absolute growth, but Israel's population is growing faster than any other population in the world, or in the modern world. And Israel is the only country in the OECD that has a higher fertility rate than what's necessary in order to remain the same size. We're the only ones who are growing out of the entire OECD. And therefore, income per capita is not rising as fast as it is in Europe. Income itself is rising as fast. It's rising even faster, but income per capita is not rising as fast as it is on average in the other countries. And income per capita is what we feel in our homes. So therefore, that's where you want a lot of improvement. We're not getting as much as we were in the past. If you were to go back before 2010, this is from 2012, but if you go back before 2010, start from 1990, 2010, you had an average growth rate of about 2% a year in income per capita. Now it's somewhere around 1%. Okay, that's the difference between the two. There's been a marked decrease. This isn't only Israel, this is happening worldwide, but there has been a decrease inside of Israel. So you ask now, that sounds strange. Now, why does it sound strange? Well, it sounds strange because, as I was talking before we started here, Israel's a startup nation, right? Israel's an incredible startup nation, and we're doing really, really well. We have this wonderful high tech that is doing an incredible job, and it's all true, and it really is fascinating, and it's really fantastic. But it's only the high tech industry. And here I'm going to show you what's been happening with wages. Wages in the high-tech industry are higher than the average in the OECD countries. They're, as you see there, $64.6 or $6 per hour. That's the annual wage. I'm sorry, this is thousands of dollars. $64.6 thousand is the average wage in the high-tech center. That's the average. Many people are earning far, far, far more than that. And in Europe, or in the OECD, it's about $50,000. That's a very, very large difference between them. The thing is, that's only about 9% of the working force. About 91% is working elsewhere and not in the high-tech industry. Now, 9%, by the way, is higher than any other country. That's still an incredibly high number, but it's still only 9%. And what generally tends to happen in most countries is that when you have a certain area of the economy that's doing very, very well, it will pull other parts of the economy after it. It'll pull up the rest of the economy. The way it does that, excuse me, is through labor force movement. When workers see that they can get higher wages elsewhere, they can go and they can get whatever training they need in order to be able to move over. And the amount of training tends to be not that high, not that heavy. You take a course for a couple of months, or you go work someplace else and you get training on the job. And by doing that, you're able to raise your wage up. You also raise the wage up of people in the lower part of the market because that's emptying out from workers. So workers are needed there, so therefore their wages also rise. And the entire economy tends to be pulled up after the high-tech industry, and that's what's happened in most of the world, but that's not what's happening inside of Israel. Inside of Israel, we take a look at the wages for the rest of the economy. It's $26,000 on average. Compare that to the $65,000 that we saw before. That's a huge difference between them. In fact, the gap between the high and the low in Israel is actually the largest in the Western world. That's the difference. Take the ratio between the 64 and the 21, and the whatever number we saw a second ago, 26, and you're going to get that 2.5. That's a very, very, very large ratio between the two, and that's much higher than any other country. What's happened in Israel, partially because of, this is going to sound strange, but partially because of all the gas that we discovered inside of Israel, is that it's harmed Israeli exporters very, very greatly. Now let me explain what the connection is between those. The gas that was discovered inside of Israel brought us to a point where we stopped importing so much gas, so much petroleum from outside the country. The gas company, the electric company moved over to production with more gas. A lot of companies moved over to production with more gas. You stop importing all of those goods, you don't need as many dollars and euros in order to import. So the demand for foreign currency went down. On the other hand, you have all these high-tech companies selling themselves off and getting a lot of increase in foreign currency coming into the country. The supply of foreign currency is going up. Now, when you put those two together, what you get is you get an incredible strengthening of the shekel. The shekel today is the strongest currency in the developed world.
What?
It's the strongest currency in the developed world. It's today the strongest currency. Take a look at what the International Monetary Fund is saying. The shekel is incredibly strong. Take a look at what's happening with respect to the rates. You know, you're down for the dollar to about 3.4. You know, you're down with the euro to 4, just a little bit over 4. And those numbers are incredibly, that makes it very difficult for a producer inside of Israel to export his goods. So what's happened is that the producers inside of Israel, from the non-high-tech sectors, from the more standard type of manufacturing, who used to export their goods, have turned inwards. And once they've turned inwards, they no longer need to compete with goods, with firms from outside the country. If they don't need to compete, they don't need to invest very heavily in high-tech, in advancing their technology. And if they're not doing that, then they're remaining with simple types of technology, and the workers have no place to go, nothing to train for. They don't have the middle investment part of Israel has basically disappeared. Those firms, those manufacturing firms that would be exporting their goods, well, almost all of the exports today are of high-tech type of firms. Very, very high-tech. The type that in order for a worker to go work there, you've got to go to the Technion for 4 years. You've got to go get a degree in electrical engineering or computer engineering, and not just go for a training course on how to operate a certain type of machine. So what that's caused is that you have the 9% on the one hand, you have the 91% on the other hand. Those 91% can't get there. They can't move up because the level of training they would need in order to move up is just too great. So it's caused a rift inside of the Israeli economy. You've gone to the extremes. And the high-tech sector has not pulled up the rest of the economy after. So that's been part of what's been going on inside of Israel. That's part of the bad news. This is showing you that the imports and exports have gone down because of that gas that we talked about before. What's happened is that, as I said, the shekel got much stronger. You're importing less because you're not importing the petroleum. You're not importing as much of the gas as you did before. And exports and imports always go together because the exchange rate is what makes them, what forces them to go together. This is the Israeli exchange rate, the shekel's exchange rate, showing you how strong it's got, how incredibly high it is these days. And the thing is, the other part of the bad news is that, you know, the fact that prices have gone down in Israel and continue to go up in the OECD doesn't make us cheap. Now this graph is a little bit hard to read. I'll tell you as follows. The line in the middle, the zero, where there's not negative, not positive, that's Israel. This is taking the difference between the price in the OECD, in each country, and the price in Israel. A negative number means that it's cheaper in the OECD country than in Israel. A positive means that it's more expensive in the OECD country than Israel. We are still more expensive than almost all of the countries in the developed world. Things in Israel are still expensive. To understand why is another lecture. I can't give that one now. But we are still more expensive today than most other countries. But if you take a look from the earlier period, the light blue lines, to the later period, the dark blue lines, for the most part, the level to which we're more expensive is down. In other words, there's been somewhat of a closing of the gap, but we are still more expensive than other countries. By the way, all this stuff is available online. You can get all these graphs. It's all there. So you don't even need to take the pictures. You can just actually just pull down the graph, and you can show it. Not a problem. Everything we have is online. Everything is free. We don't charge for anything. As I said, the book in back is our bestseller, but that's only in quantity. We don't actually get anything out of it. Housing prices are always interesting. We know the housing prices, there's a big housing price inside of Israel. And what this is showing you the increase in rental prices on the one hand, and the increase in purchase prices on the other hand. And this is in real terms. That means inflation has already been cleaned out of this. And if you see that positive trend going up from 2008 in both rental prices and in housing prices, that's over and above inflation. It's still going up more than inflation is going up. It's going up. These are both going up very, very significantly. Okay, so we've had now 8 years, not almost 10 years, 8 years, the prices have been going up consistently. 9 years, prices have been going up consistently. We're almost at 10 already. Now, that big gap between housing prices for purchase and rental is a little bit strange. That can happen for one of two reasons. It can happen because people think that interest rates are going to fall. Or it can happen, or interest rates actually fall. Or it can happen because people expect housing prices to go up. So in that case, it's speculation. People could be buying housing in order to speculate prices will go up, and figuring they could sell it later for more than they're going to buy it now, so the value of their portfolio will increase. Now, in general, you would say what's happened is, in fact, interest rates in Israel have gone down. And that explains a lot of the gap in those growth is because of the difference in the interest rates. But that is not true for the past few years. Because the past few years, the interest rate in Israel has been zero, basically. And the interest rate of zero, nobody expects it to go down anymore. So therefore, that part's not going to happen. So that growing gap that's happening in the last few years is only expectations. And that basically means as follows. Independent of everything that's going on with respect to trying to affect the housing market inside of Israel, consumers still think the prices are going up. Consumers still believe that prices are going to continue to rise.
Despite Kahlon's promise.
Right. In other words, people aren't, it doesn't mean Kahlon's wrong. It doesn't mean the prices won't go down. It means that people aren't yet convinced it's going to go down. Once people start being convinced that it's going to go down, then that's going to stop happening. But people aren't necessarily convinced. Now, this is nothing to do with being right or wrong. I've got to emphasize that. But this is expectations. Okay. Let's move on to a little bit about welfare. In welfare, I'm just going to show you a little bit about the El Aluf Committee. The El Aluf Committee in 2014 came out with recommendations about how to combat poverty in Israel. Their goal, it was, within a decade, or in a decade, to lower the poverty rate in Israel down to the average of the OECD. Poverty rate in Israel was about 19%, and they wanted to lower it down to about 11%, which is where the OECD was on average. 90% is the highest. This is talking about disposable income. 90% is the highest in any developed country. They put out a very, very comprehensive plan with details about the things that need to be done and pricing out the different categories. The total budget necessary to do this was 7.4 billion shekel a year. That was the amount of money. And they were supposed to start doing some of it. The government didn't buy all of it. They were going to do some of it, but it was supposed to start in 2015. 2015 turned into an election year. And once it became an election year, everything stopped. Nothing happened. Once they got past the election year, then they started taking some steps. And the numbers that you see here are the percentage of what was recommended that was actually done. Okay? So the 7.4 billion is 100%. And there was just over 2 billion invested, 30% you see there on the bottom, in 2016. In other words, most of it was not done, some of it was done, and some of it that was done because of coalition decisions. So in order to form a coalition, some of the parties requested some of these issues be done. 2017 isn't that much better. Actually, you can't see the whole thing. Oh my, okay, you can't see the whole thing here on this graph. Remind me I have to replace this graph, please. 2017, you see a huge number, 90%, right? Okay, that number includes in it this Savings for Every Child plan that started in Israel this year. For those of you who don't know, from January 2017, the government opened up an account for every under 18 citizen of Israel. Jewish, Arab, doesn't matter who you are, every single child had an account open for them, which the government places 50 shekel every month. The family is allowed to match that from the money that they get anyway for their child allowances. They're allowed to dedicate 50 shekel towards that account. That account accrues pretty good interest and returns over the period of their childhood. They're able to open it up when they're 18 or when they're 21. Once it is opened up, it gives them a lump sum with which to start their adult lives.
Wow.
Okay, that's the idea. Now, if you think through what the numbers are, if you take what an average return might be, a not too risky type of investment, you can choose what type of investment you want to put it in. Each family can choose whatever they want. You know, so my kids ask me what do they do for their kids. I said, look, your kids are very young. You should be investing in something that's a little more risky because over a long period of time, the stock market does much better than anything else. Somebody whose kids were already, 15 years old, I wouldn't say the same thing. I would say you might want to take a safer investment because you don't know the volatility over a short period of time is more of a problem. But this turned out to be, first of all, it's a lot of money. If you think it through the numbers, if you take an average rate of return over the period, then you would end up, after 18 years, with enough money for a college education.
Wow.
That's about the number. That's about the number. Enough money for a college education. In Israel, not in the US. Okay? Nobody can afford a college education in the US. But that's the amount of money you're talking about. If you take a look at the returns in the first year, since January 2017 until now, it would actually be about double that. Because the returns in this past year have been incredibly high, but anybody who saw the stock market yesterday knows that that's incredibly volatile. And last year was an incredible year in the stock markets. Did very, very well. But that's what this did. That's what the 90% is. Now the thing is, in the LLF committee recommendations, they actually mention this issue of savings for every child, but they don't price it out. It's not included in their calculations of the 7.4 billion. So this 90%, if you actually took a look at what was actually done out of the recommendations, it's still only 31%. That extra 60% is from this savings for every child. Okay, so that's where it's all coming from. Continuing very, very quick. Oh, we don't have a lot of time. So maybe I'm gonna run forward and skip through this and move over to here. Taking a look at health expenditures. Health expenditures inside of Israel, as you know, is like in most countries, it's a combination of public expenditure and private expenditure. The U.S. has much more private expenditure than public expenditure. The OECD has more. Israel's somewhere in the middle. But Israel's been the percentage of public has actually been going down. And that's both because of the government not necessarily putting in as much, but also because people are actually spending a lot more privately on private insurance. If you take a look at what's happened to expenditures on private health insurance inside of Israel, it's gone up very, very significantly. It's about doubled over from the beginning of the millennia. And that's very significant because, not just because people are insuring themselves better, but people are not necessarily insuring themselves cleverly. Insurance companies are calling people and trying to sell them with all kinds of policies, and people are basically buying insurance for things that they're already insured for, already covered for, and they don't realize that they're covering themselves 2 and 3 times for the same ailments, and that they're covered through the public service. And that's
they
caused.
Don't read the fine letters.
They don't understand it. It's too much. Nobody reads that. I don't even think the people who wrote it read it, but it really is. It's really just too much information, and you end up going in and buying these things that you don't necessarily need, and that's a real problem. If you take a look why people buy private insurance, why they go privately, so these are the reasons that they explain they go privately. They do get to choose their physician better. Okay, somebody who's outside of their some an expert who they don't have access to. There are services that are not available. I'm not so sure to what extent, but there are certainly some of those. But they get earlier appointments, and that's a very, very important issue, actually. Very often people who will have to go through some type of see an expert. Sometimes if you try to go publicly, you will have to wait a very long time in order to see the expert. If you go privately, you can see them the next day. The same is true with elective surgeries. They can get the elective surgery done much more quickly privately than you can get it done publicly. And those are significant issues. If you take a look at what's happened to healthcare expenditures, so take a look at those top two bars. Those top two bars are showing you the yellow one, or mustard color, is GDP per capita, which has been increasing very significantly. If you take a look at the blue one, that's showing you what's happened to total expenditures on health in the country. And basically that says that it's been going up at the same rate, except for two things. The two things are, health costs have been going up more than average costs. They've been going up more than the standard CPI, the Standard Consumer Price Index. And that doesn't take that into account. So you've got to discount for that, and that takes up about 10% of what's being expended. The other point is, we're growing older. You know, the population in Israel is growing older. And the needs of an aging population are greater than the needs of a younger population. And that means that the costs that are needed for the healthcare system are higher now than they were before. If you take both of those into account, you're actually losing about 20%, and that's what's giving you the bottom line over there. In other words, if you compare in real terms what was given 20 years ago and what's given now, you're getting a lot less than you were getting then. Okay, so that's with respect to the health system. Moving on to comparisons of the population, Jewish population looking at the Arab population a little bit more carefully. Fertility rates, as you probably all know, have changed very significantly inside of Israel. Israel has this unique state that the population growth fertility rates have been about between 3 and 3.1 since about 1980. Before that, it was a little higher than that. But it's been there since about 1980. As I said, nobody else is above a replication, which is 2.1. Nobody else is above 2.1. But we're there, and it's very, very, very high. And it stayed there. But it stayed there in an interesting way. It stayed there with interesting changes in the makeup of who's having the children. And the Jewish population is having more children, and the Arab population is having fewer children. Now, we'll talk about each one of those. The Jewish population is having more children, partially because there are an increasing number of ultra-Orthodox who have a lot of children. But it's not just that. Actually, the ultra-Orthodox over the past number of years have been having fewer children than in the past, but the secular are having more children than they used to have.
So the national religious?
National religion has stayed about the same at about 4, and it hasn't moved in over a decade. It moved a little bit up and down, but it stayed basically the same. But the secular are actually having more, and we're just saying it's more spreading of love throughout the country. This goes along with what we were talking about before. Okay, we need to do more of that. The Arab population has actually been going down really significantly. And if you go back to 1980, the Arab population in 1980 had a fertility rate of 6 children per family. And now it's down to 3. And it's still on its way down. And a lot of this has happened as a result of them getting better education and moving into the labor force. And when that happens, families just tend to have a different number of children. They tend to have fewer children. Now, interestingly, if you take a look at the Jewish populations, the number of children on average a family has is directly correlated with the level of religiosity. The more religious have more children, the less religious have fewer children. With the Arab populations, there's no connection between them. There's no relationship between the level of religiosity and the number of children that they have. Absolutely none. Just an interesting finding. If you take a look at life expectancy for Israeli Arabs, comparing them to Arab countries, Israeli Arabs have the longest life expectancy of Arab population in any country. However, if you compare them to the Jewish population, so the Arab-Israeli population is well below the Jewish population. The Jewish population in Israel has a higher life expectancy than any other country, or than the OECD. Okay, let me change that a little bit.
No, leave it like that.
Yeah, leave it like that. Okay. So let me explain that a drop. The life expectancy in Israel is much higher than the United States, much higher than the OECD. If you break it down, males in Israel, men in Israel, live longer than expected. The difference between, okay, there's a standard, I'm going backwards. There's a standard model that explains life expectancy. It shows how long people are expected to live based on all kinds of indicators like their socioeconomic status, like the amount of, the size of the population relative to the geography size, all kinds of different explanatory variables that explain how long people tend to live in different countries. If you run that model on all the countries in the world, and you run it for males in Israel, you look at men in Israel, you find that men in Israel have the largest deviation from any country in the world. The men in Israel are living 7.2 years longer than they are expected to, based and according to their wives, than they should. but that's actually what the finding is. 7.2 years longer. The U.S. is at the other extreme. They're living 5.6 years fewer than they should be living. And a lot of people think that's because of diet. So you go and you try to understand why is this happening. And it turns out
this is just for men.
This is for men is that deviation. Women
I
are.
don't need the chart.
This is for everybody. But women in Israel are living exactly according to their expectation. In other words, and that makes it so that the gap between men and women in Israel, women live longer than men, but the gap between women and men in Israel is the smallest in the Western world. It's the smallest gap any place in the Western world. And that's because men are living much longer than they're expected to live. And it turns out econometrically, when you test this on all the countries, half of that is explained by military service. Military service. It turns out that when you go to military service, you have to get into shape at some point in your life. And that has lasting effects. It has an effect for your entire life, and there are those who keep in shape, there are those who don't, but it still has a lasting effect. And one of the pieces of evidence for this is cardiovascular disease in Israel is the lowest in the Western world for men, but not for women. For the Jewish population, but not for the Arab population. So part of this gap you see between the Arab population and the Jewish population is that unexpected high level for the Jewish population, but the rest of it is the socioeconomic level. If you were to control for socioeconomic levels, you wouldn't see a big difference between the Jewish population and the Arab population. It's all based on the fact that they are at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale inside of Israel. They're earning a lot less than the Jewish populations are on average. So that's what's explaining the big difference. The same is true with infant mortality. Infant mortality in Israel for Arab Israelis is lower than almost any other Arab country. But if you compare it to the Jewish population, it's still a lot higher. And the question is, why is it, where is it that the Arab population is suffering so much more than the Jewish population? So we looked at the types of causes of death that are the biggest differences between the Jewish population and the Arab population. The largest difference is in congenital disorders. Now what's happening is that the Arab population, there's a lot of intermarriage. People in the Arab population, very high percentages, are marrying first cousins, and there are many, many diseases at birth that are coming out of that. That's not happening in the Jewish population.
Do they do the testing?
They don't do the testing. I mean, they do. They're offered the testing, but it's not pushed down their throats, and some of them don't do it.
They marry within their tribe.
Right.
That's what they do.
Right. And many of them don't do the testing. And one of the things that we talk about is the importance of getting that out there, of explaining this to them better, of showing them what they need to do, of pushing that down their throats to some extent, because that's what can help. But the other thing is they're considered very much more reckless drivers. They smoke an awful lot. They have a lot more diabetes. Their dietary habits are not as good. And all of these things affect life expectancy. If you take a look, I'm just going to show you one with respect to the percentage of smokers. So the percentage of smokers is much higher in the Arab population than in the Jewish population. Okay. But the other part of it is, or another issue is, access to good medical care. And the situation is that the Arab populations tend to be concentrated in the north of the country, in the south of the country, in the periphery, which is not where the hospitals are. It's not where the hospital beds are. It's not where the expert doctors are. And when they need to get good treatment, they need to travel very, very far. So what's being shown here is the 1 is basically the average. Okay, that solid line there is the average. And this is where the population is located. So you see, for instance, in Jerusalem, you have less than the average in the Arab population, of the Jewish population. The Arab population is relatively high. And that's actually a good area. But look at the north. The north is where you have such a large concentration of Arab Israelis. And despite that, the number of physicians is relatively low. And the number of nurses is relatively low. And if I go on to the next one, this is talking about the number of inpatient beds, the children's inpatient beds, emergency medicine units, and surgical units. And the places where the Arabs are located the most have the worst, don't have as many services. And as a result, because the hospitals are located in the main cities, and that's not where most of the Arab population is, they just don't have that access as well. And that has an effect on their health. Not necessarily that they're going to die immediately, but they're not going to be taken care of as well. And that's going to have an effect eventually on their longevity. Okay. So that's something we talk about, and all kinds of steps that are needed in order to be able to improve that. Going over to schooling, we can see a big issue inside of Israel was class size. This is discussed a lot in the Israeli press last year, and we decided to take a good look at what's happening in class size. Class sizes. One of Bennett's, one of the Ministry of Education's plans was to improve the situation with respect to class size inside of Israel, to lower the number of children per class. That's happened in the Arab populations. It hasn't happened in the Jewish populations. Okay, that's what we're seeing in this graph right here. It's happened a little bit, but only very, very little in the Jewish populations. It's happened quite a bit in the different parts of the Arab populations. Another thing that he concentrated on is because of the changing labor market, trying to get people out of that low part of the service areas and get them into some type of vocational training, like happens in Germany a lot. And get them that vocational training so that they'll be able to have something that they can work in and be able to make a decent living at. And actually that's had some success, both in the Jewish population and in the Arab population. You're having more people, but the change in the Arab population is really stark. It's really incredible. It's been going up very significantly. And they want that. I mean, it's good for them to have that. It gives them something in hand that they can do. So they'll learn to be car mechanic. That's great. Let them learn to be car mechanic and let them be good car mechanic. Okay, going on to, this is an interesting study on bullying inside different schools. And we took a look at what's happening in different types of cyberbullying and just regular bullying inside of the classes. And just I want to show you a little bit of interesting findings on what's happening with respect to ostracism inside of Israeli schools. So what's happening is that if you take a look at classes and you ask in what percentage of classes is there any kind of ostracism going on, 61.5% of classes have some type of ostracism going on inside of the class. There's only 38%, 38.5% in which there's been no bullying reported inside of that classroom. That's a pretty high rate, 61.5%. But now divided up by the different types of populations, and actually a lot of people think this is amazing. The larger percentages are in the Bedouin communities, is where you have the most ostracism going on. You have a lot less in the Jewish communities than you have in the Arab communities, which is an education issue. I mean, this is something that needs to be improved very significantly. But I'm going to show you that there have been improvements. First of all, there are big differences between boys and girls. In the Arab population, boys are being ostracized a lot more than girls. In the Jewish population, there's only a small difference, but it cuts in the opposite direction. And if you take a look at what's happening with respect to, the children who come from better backgrounds tend to have less of a problem. Okay? But here's the one that I like. This is showing what's happening over grades and over time and differences between the two populations. First of all, you see a number of things happening here. The most stark finding is everything's going down, right? So the amount of ostracism has been going down over time. So steps that have been taken have been beneficial. There is an improvement here going on. The biggest improvement has been in the Arab population. But also, as you get to higher grades, there tends to be less ostracism. And in general, the Jewish population tends to have less than the Arab population has. The Hebrew education system has less than the Arab education system has. Okay? That's an interesting little piece on ostracism. You're going to tell me when I have to finish.
Very soon.
So, what?
Very soon.
Whenever you want. Employment rates, we're moving, we finished school, now we're heading out to the labor market. Employment rates inside of Israel, have improved for those two populations. Remember those two populations I talked about, the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredi men, and the Arab women are still working at relatively low rates. Now this is a young age group, 23 to 30, so it's not taking those more major years in which people are working, even at higher rates, from 35 to, or from 25 to 55 is when you have the highest rates of participation. If you would look at that, the numbers would be higher for everybody, okay? But you see the improvement among the ultra-Orthodox men, you see the improvement among the Arab Israeli women, but you see improvement for every group. But those are very, very comforting, good findings to see those growth rates over there.
Do you have any figures on Olim?
What?
Olim, do you have any figures on immigrants, Olim?
We do have, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Do you have any figures on the employment or unemployment rates of immigrants? I don't have any. I don't have them here. Immigrants in Israel, Olim in Israel, work at higher rates than those who were not born here, especially the Olim from the former Soviet Union. And that happened almost immediately. As soon as they came into the economy in the early 90s, they went out and started working. And they did not stay home at all. It was really quick. The thing is that the country wasn't ready for them. In other words, wasn't ready for them in numbers, but ready for them in quality. Because they came with an incredibly high level of education. And the country, just couldn't absorb that many engineers and that many doctors that quickly because it was just too many people. So people went to work, but they went to work a couple of levels below their old level. And you would have, an outstanding chemist only working as a laboratory assistant, and that was if he was lucky. If he wasn't lucky, he was working cleaning houses. So that's a lot of what happened. But with time, that changed, and they moved into Phil. But they worked at very, very high rates. But we don't have separate on the immigrants. It's easy to do. Okay.
Questions, can I say?
What? All right.
Wrap up.
So this is just pretty. Okay, it doesn't really matter what it means. This is actually dividing up. We did for the first time. We were able to look at the ultra-Orthodox communities inside of Israel and divide them up according to where they're located, whether they're Hasidim, which is I'm not going to say it once, or they're the different streams of ultra-Orthodox. They're not all the same. They're very, very different from each other. So I'm gonna skip that, but I'm going to show you what's been happening. I want to go to since I don't have much time. I want to go over here. So let's go over to this graph right here. So here we're talking about, again, because I want to concentrate on the Arab Israeli population. Take a look at what's been happening with respect to the matriculation. So who is the matriculation? And what's been happening is that there's been a large increase in the percentage who have been getting their bagrut, getting the matriculation degrees. The yellow lines, the mustard lines, are those for whom their success is high enough to get them into university. The blue are for those who do not have good enough credentials to get into university with their bagrut, but they have finished the exams, they've matriculated, but they haven't been able to get high enough results. But take a look at all populations are increasing, but a number of things stand out. First of all, the women, the Jewish population is still doing better than the Arab population for the most part, but the Arab population is catching up. And in particular, it's catching up for the women. The women are doing really, really well. Now, this is something that we find over and over again. The Arab Israeli women, the young women, the young girls, they really want to get good education. And they really want to learn sciences. They really want to learn computers. And they're doing it. And they're doing well at it. And I keep saying that I think that's, if you take a look at where potential growth for Israel is coming in the future, that's one of the main places where you can get a lot of good growth in Israel. Because they want it, they're good at it, and they're doing it. The problem is coming in on the other side of the equation. The problem is coming in getting jobs afterwards. When they have to decide where to go in order to study in college, what to do, they tend to go and study health, and they study education. Even those who are great at computers and great at sciences, they go into health and they go into education. And you know why? Because they can get jobs there. And they're worried, and they're right to be worried, that if they were to go study high tech,
they would have trouble getting into one of the big high-tech firms inside of Israel. Because they're not necessarily that open to just taking people, from the Arab community because of their own concerns because of it. And that's a real problem. Convincing the big firms to be willing to take that chance, be willing to do that, to change the way that they hire people, is a real challenge. If that happens, then those Arab Israeli girls can go and start studying computers at the Technion. Why not? And go and become engineers. And the percentage they're doing it is much too small. Much too small. So if you take a look, in fact, at the percentage who are studying sciences and getting a science technology major in high school, they're very, very high percentages. Look at the women down there. Look what percentage are actually going and studying those topics. It's huge. It's much more than the Jewish women. The Jewish women aren't going and studying computers as much. But the Arab Israeli women are. The men are also, but it's mostly the women. Now you take a look at the share of students. Women are studying much more than men. It's more extreme in the Arab populations than the Jewish populations. You can see those populations that have done the best. The Muslim population has grown very, very significantly among the women. The Druze, these Bedouins, they've all had very, very large increases, but the Bedouins are still lagging behind the other parts of the Arab population. Take a look at share with degrees. You can see very, very clearly how well the Christians are doing, the Christian women in particular. Very, very similar to the Jewish women. You can see again the Bedouins lagging behind, and you can see the big differences between men and women. You're waving at me, or you're telling me I have 5 minutes?
No.
Either she's waving at me to say hi, or she's telling me I have 5 minutes.
I'd like to make some time for questions.
Oh, okay. So then I can stop. I'll just stop right here and show you what people are studying. And take a look at that dark blue on the bottom, education. You know what? Let's even go here. This one's better. This is for females. Take a look at the dark blue. What percentage is studying education among the Arab population? And take a look at the health, which is the next one. And you take a look at the 7% for Christian women are studying health. That's not the one I wanted. Okay, we're gonna stop here because I want to let you ask questions. I'll leave it on this one. Showing you the message from this graph is look at the women, Arab Israeli women who go and get a degree, go to work. They go to work. Arab Israeli women who do not get a degree don't go nearly as much to work. Those for men, they tend to go to work whether they got a degree or they didn't get a degree. For the Arab Israeli women, there's a huge discrepancy between those who did succeed in completing their studies and those who didn't go and study. So I'm going to stop here and open to questions.
Questions?
And there's lots more which I didn't get to.
Right. Anybody? Yes.
You haven't put the number of Haredi men or women who go into higher education.
Okay, so the number of I of course have those numbers, but the number of Haredi men. If you take a look from 2008 to 2014, a 6-year period, the number of Haredi who went into higher education tripled. It tripled, okay? But it's not high percentages. The percentage of Haredi men, by the way, it tripled. About 2/3 of them are women, about 1/3 are men, like the rest of the populations. But the point is that it's still low percentages. The percentage who have a degree, about 8% of the men have degrees, about 15% of the women have degrees. For our populations, it's about twice that, and for the Jewish populations, it's a little bit less than twice the Arab populations. But those are the basic numbers. Women always more than men, but the Haredi is still in low percentages. And part of that is that they're going into study, but the success rate is relatively low. Only 40% of the Haredi men who go to higher education complete their degrees. Okay, 2 out of every 5. For women, it's just like the rest of the population. It's 80%, 70%, much higher. But for the men, first of all, about 20% of them are dropping out during a preparatory year, mechina. They take a year of mechina. Some of them, about half the people who start mechina don't finish it. So that's
the average who enter mechina. The average that enter mechina from the general population.
Oh.
Is it the same? Or?
First of all, very small percentage do that because why did the ultra-Orthodox men go? The ultra-Orthodox men go because they didn't get any math.
English.
They didn't get any English, they didn't get any computers. So therefore, they go in for a year, they try to close a little bit of those gaps. Half of them don't make it through that year. Okay? And that knocks out 20%. The other 40% is knocked out during their studies. They end up not completing their studies. You only have about 42% who start and end up finishing. That's for the men. Women do much better. Because women did study math, and women did study English in their high schools.
We'll take one more question. Isn't it?
Yeah, you mentioned that the Arab population here in Israel is much less than it used to be, but in the West it's supposed to be much higher from what I read than from all the other population.
Fertility rates. You talk about?
They're told like to have a lot of children. It helps in, that would be like a silent war or something.
It wouldn't surprise me. I don't know that, but that wouldn't
That's
surprise me.
what
The
the
fertility rates in Israel, look, generally, worldwide, fertility rates tend to be negatively correlated with socioeconomic success. Poor families tend to have more children, richer families tend to have fewer children. That's true worldwide always. The large increase in incomes of the Arab Israeli population and their need to go out to the workforce. You know, in 2003, the government made the decision to cut child allowances very drastically. Israel was giving out very, very large child allowances. For each child, you got a large sum every month. The sum of money you got, if you had a large enough family, you could support your family without going to work at all.
Are you talking
Literally.
about all across the board? Are you
All
talking
across the
about
board.
All the citizens?
All across the board, all the citizens. Part of what kept the ultra-Orthodox out of the workforce was the fact they didn't need to go. And their ideal, the ultra-Orthodox men have as their ideal to study Talmud, to study Torah, and not to go out and better your economic life. That's not what their goal is. And as a result, if they were able to allow themselves to sit in the yeshiva and study all day and not go to the workforce, that's what they did. And that was the case in 2003, until 2003. In 2003, the government cut child allowances drastically, and that's what started part of the flow, or most of the flow, into the labor force, and also into education. It started because they had to go. When they had to go, they went. Okay? So first the women went. At the beginning, the men didn't go because they studied. Women didn't go because they had large families and they took care of their kids. Therefore, nobody went to the labor force. They started going in. First, the women started going in more. Then the men started going in more because they had the necessity to do that. For the Arab populations, it wasn't that much different in that, well, the men did work already then, but they had very, very low wages, and they were largely also living off of these child allowances. When that stopped, they had to get better education. They had to work more. The women had to start working and getting better education, and that basically leads to lower fertility. It just naturally does. So therefore, if you're being given a religious declaration, you must have more children, then maybe you can do what you're being told to do. But if not, then the economics does affect it.
Because I don't know what the situation is now, but are Arabs allowed to have more than one wife, and therefore they have more children? I don't know.
I don't know either. I think Bedouins do, but I'm not really sure.
Christians surely.
Yeah.
Christians do not, but I'm not sure who does and who doesn't.
I read like in the West that every 7 years they're able to divorce the first wife and marry another wife, and therefore that's how they continue.
Okay, well,
It's,
it didn't happen by
I'm
me.
just saying that's what I read.
Yeah.
That's what I'm asking.
It didn't happen by me. I would be on my sixth wife now.
Okay, Professor Glass, thank you for fascinating lecture.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. We'll take your next one in a year with more positive uphill trends. Thank you for coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you.